Hi there. With operations in more than 20 different countries and over 3 million deliveries tracked per year, Shippeo is the European leader in supply chain visibility. Each day, they use machine learning algorithms to keep track of their customers' deliveries using real-time information. Today, I'm delighted to say we're joined by Pierre Khoury, the CEO and co-founder of Shippeo, who's going to tell us a little bit about both the positives and also some of the challenges of real-time visibility in supply chains. So Pierre, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Killian. I'm very happy to be here.
Nice. So if you could just perhaps start us off by just sort of telling us a little bit about your background and also just telling us how Shippeo sort of came about.
Yeah, so by training, I was an engineer, then I went through finance where I co-founded a private equity fund. And then 4 years ago, we started Shippeo with the aim to have real-time visibility over transportation, road transportation especially, which has been a black box for the last 40 years. So now Shippeo is a 70 employees company, and we are leader in Europe for tracking road transportation all over the continent.
Okay, and as always, it wouldn't be LokadTV without Johannes Vermeerel. So Johannes, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about what is real-time visibility with regards to supply chains?
I mean, the cardinal rule of optimization is that you cannot optimize what you do not measure. So if something remains opaque to you, then you have no hope ever to optimize anything. So I think, and supply chains, it's very difficult because it's highly distributed. Things are spread over literally continents. Historically, people started to track what do not move, like what you have in warehouses, which is, and as long as things are static, it's kind of, I would say it was not easy, but it started several decades ago. Now the problem is that supply chains is all about the things that are moving, like trucks and shipments and whatnot. And there it becomes very difficult. And when you say real time is how do you access this information without having to wait for days so that all the data circuits will finally flow back to headquarters, which is a challenge because if you do not do that, well, you lose the opportunity to optimize just because it arrived too late. So real time is very important in this aspect.
Okay, so that's kind of the theory behind it. Pierre, perhaps you could sort of just tell us a little bit more about how it actually works in practice. So how does the technology work at Shippeo?
So as I said, it was a challenge unsolved for the last 40 years. So how we have organized ourselves to solve that? First, solve the heterogeneous IT of carriers. So we developed more than 150 connectors with various type of systems like telematics, dispatch systems for carriers, and a own mobile app for small carriers. So we aggregate data and GPS points every 3 to 5 minutes, whatever the source is. And then we can do predictive analytics on that, especially estimated time of arrival.
Okay, and Johannes, why is this of interest from a kind of Lokad perspective? Why is this of interest to you?
I mean, first for us, when we want to decide whether you want to purchase more or you need to maybe purchase from a different supplier, this depends on in order to optimize this decision, it depends on what you have or what you most likely will have by a certain amount of time. So, for example, if you realize that a supplier that can deliver products in 10 days because is going to be late of 5 days for their delivery, and thanks to Shippeo you already know that because the tracking tells you that the trucks barely moved for the last couple of days or whatnot, that it means that maybe you can decide to mitigate what would become a production incident, so your manufacturing plant would stop just because you don't have the raw materials, by passing an emergency order to a supplier that is maybe more expensive but that is just super close and that can deliver on the next day what you need. But if you want to have like super agile kind of emergency correction measure, you need to have this data. So for us, the big challenge is that frequently all we have is data that comes from the transactional system, so the ERPs, the WMS, the order management system, which do not give any information beside where things have been sent, or sometimes frequently we don't have more than the purchase order has been sent. What happens after that? Well, we don't know. Ultimately, we will know that it has been received, but it will be very, very late.
Okay, so that sort of would kind of replace the kind of probabilistic approach we're taking to lead times. So is that going to be completely eradicated if we had customers who are using Shippeo?
I think probabilistic remains, because if you're halfway through, I would say, a delivery that is supposed to take a couple of days, when you are at day one, you still have some degree of uncertainty that remains for the last 4 days. But the question is that this uncertainty can be vastly reduced, especially as time goes on. You see, that the very interesting things about Shippeo is that if you have something that is supposed to take 5 days for transport, crossing all Europe, at day 4, if your truck is where you expect the truck to be, the remaining uncertainty is like almost nothing. But which in contrast, if we do it without transport data, where at day 4, we don't know anything more than what we had at D0, because, well, the truck is not there yet, that's for sure, but that was expected. Now, is there a delay? We don't know. So we are still having this very uncertain situation, whereas with Shippeo, at day 4, out of a delivery that is supposed to take 5 days, at day 4, you have almost no uncertainty left, which is excellent, and would lead you to better optimization just through reduced uncertainty.
So it's basically all about sort of refining those probabilities then. Yeah. Pierre, perhaps you could just sort of tell me a little bit more about some of the technical challenges you face. I mean, when working in real time, it can't be very straightforward. Yeah. So what are some of the challenges you face there?
Yeah, sure. I will say that there is 3 challenges. First, from a technical perspective, again, to connect more than 150 different systems and to gather that into a single canonical data model in real time, and to have a stable and consistent data flow for millions and millions of GPS points every day. The second challenge is about change management. Transportation is usually very slow to change, and it's a very big challenge to make it happen, to onboard carriers, users, and to train them and to have the results that we want. And the third challenge is about the data pipeline, the quality of data, and to have the right rules to fetch the data and to have something consistent and a high quality data. Okay. So we have roughly 3 challenges.
And Johannes, would you kind of agree that there's the need for all of this data? I mean, it seems like nowadays there's so much data being collected. I mean, I could probably sneeze and somebody somewhere would be collecting that data. I mean, do we really need this in supply chains?
I mean, this is highly, highly valuable data. I mean, we are not talking of random tweets. We are talking of trucks, and one truck will typically have several hundred thousands worth of euro of merchandise. If you're transporting electronics or anything that is non-trivial. I mean, assuming you're not transporting earth or dirt or sand, what you're moving across those supply chains, if you have a truck full of drugs, in pharmaceutical, that's extremely valuable. So this data is real time, but you're tracking assets that are worth literally tons of money. So, and yes, it does make sense. And if you do not, and you have frequently highly asymmetrical situation where if maybe what you're delivering is not that expensive, it's just small parts that are, price of the metal, but if you don't have them, then you have a whole manufacturing plant that stopped working, and then you have like hundreds of people who cannot work anymore just because you're on hold until you have those repair parts that are being delivered. So again, the idea is that those data are incredibly valuable because first they can be attached to physical assets that are expensive, but also they can be attached to assets, even if they're not expensive by themselves, their availability or unavailability can have very high cost down the line for other elements of your supply chains.
So where do we kind of draw the line in terms of the data that you're actually collecting? I mean, it's obviously good to know where a truck is in any given moment, but are you keeping an eye on sort of traffic, sea reports? I mean, are you even taking into consideration the weather? I mean, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, we need to factor all these issues to have a reliable estimated time of arrival, meaning traffic, breaks for drivers. If you are driving through Europe, you need to have legal rest each day and night and weekends. All the patterns of loading time and loading time. So we factor all this into our machine learning algorithm to have something very reliable, and I think we are building one of the best estimated time of arrival algorithm in Europe. And just to give an example of what Johan said, one of our customers sent us an email to thank us in December because of the yellow jackets. His traffic was was not running as usual, and I've been able to anticipate that, to reposition other trucks or to mitigate the risk within his production plan, and to have at the end zero effect of the yellow jacket. And on the opposite, he should be obliged to buy helicopter deliveries or plane deliveries for his products, and it should have been a very high cost. So it's exactly the value that we bring, and I think it's a good example of what Johan said.
And the gilets jaunes is definitely a very specific example. But you sort of mentioned you got a level of granularity of updates every sort of 3 to 5 minutes of data, correct?
Yeah, it's correct. So I think that the new boundaries that we are opening is really the real-time data, and it's thanks to GPS points. So we gather data every 3 to 5 minutes, depending on the carrier's system. So it's very granular, and it allows a lot of things on the time for loading, time for unloading, the problems who can be encountered on the road. And I think at the end this data is valuable for all parties, because the idea is not to restrain the access of this data, is to share it with the right rules, the right access, granted access to other parties, meaning the warehouse has the loading, the end customer, the transport team, the customer service team, and at the end everybody can be more productive, more efficient, because they know what will happen. And I would like to thank Amazon, because at the end all the customers, even for B2B deliveries, want to have the same effect, the same experience as for Amazon with a B2C parcel. So thanks, Amazon.
Amazon are the number one thing on this channel that we seem to mention every sort of week. Johannes, in terms of supply chains, often we're not talking about in terms of minutes, we're more talking about in terms of hours and more really days. I mean, is this level of granularity a bit too much? I mean, do we really need this level of granularity?
I mean, yes, because frequently, I mean, especially for transport, we don't need it for everything. But in transport, do not underestimate the amount of problems that can happen in supply chain at the boundaries. For example, you can have a delivery that is made to a warehouse, but then the merchandise are only picked the next day, or 8 hours later, or a lot of things can happen really at the boundaries. Where how do you end up with 3 months of lead times? The answer is most of the time, goods are not moving or are not transformed. So here I think those thin grain lead times, I mean, we are talking lead times, but real time, but also something that still makes sense, I would say, supply chain wise. We are not trying to have like sub-millisecond measurements, like if you were trying to optimize packets, the distribution of packets over the internet. The granularity is more like a couple of minutes. That makes sense when you have like a physical operation that needs to happen. And indeed, then once we have this information that can detect a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that all the analysis that will flow will remain at the minutes. For example, if you're trying to optimize, compress lead times that end-to-end are several weeks, yes, you have minutes that are done, you have measurements in minutes that will let you pinpoint tons of things, of probably patterns that are slightly dysfunctional, especially at the boundaries of the systems, because you see that the main problem in supply chain is that when something passes from one system, that can be a software or company or teams from another, that's where the gaps can happen, and then you have like accidental delays. you can remove them. And then you typically, when you want to do like network-wide optimization, you're going to reshift to something that is more like a, I would say, optimization where you think in terms of days rather than minutes. But it really depends on the type of problem.
And just to complete what Jean said, by definition, supply chain is a chain, meaning that there is several actors within the chain, and each actor today have a very siloed approach and information. So what we do is to share the information on transportation to have all the actors having the right information and to break these silos to optimize. And yes, sometimes an information up to the minute is important. For instance, to you know that within a warehouse there is 2 hours of waiting at loading time, 2 hours of waiting at deliveries. So with the information, where is the truck, when it will arrive, you can reduce that by up to 50% and to have fewer waiting time, meaning fewer cost of transportation, fewer cost of stock, and everybody is more productive. And it's the same for the carriers, because at the end is waiting for nothing. So we think this kind of example is a good example of a win-win-win situation for everybody.
And let's talk about those different actors along the chain. Who should the impetus be on? Who should be Shippeo's main customer? Should it be the retailer who's actually ordering the stock in, or should it actually be the shipping companies themselves?
Yeah, so our model is based on the shipper approach. We think that it's a actor who have the main benefits, and it should be pushing the solution towards the chain. So our customer is the shipper, and the system is free for all the stakeholders, including the carriers. So the system is 100% free for the carriers, and we try to involve as much as actors as possible.
Okay, great. Johannes will start sort of concluding things a bit today. Other than just sort of lead times, why is this of so much interest to Lokad? I mean, how can you see the two tools working so well together?
I mean, right now we are frequently making, I would say, wild guesses concerning, the state of the supply chain that we are trying to optimize. Yes, we are measuring things as much as possible by retrieving, the stocks that we have, etc. But the reality is that all those things that are on order, where you have quantities that are on order, you have quantities that are in between locations. Very frequently, it's just opaque, and so I would say it needlessly complicates, because it forces us to have like a guesstimation of what is the state of the system, and not only that complicate the modeling, that makes the optimization in the end less efficient, just because the more uncertainty. I mean, you need a probabilistic approach to be able to even survive, numerically speaking, to the uncertainty. But that doesn't mean that uncertainty is any desirable. I mean, especially when you have an option to just remove an enormous amount of uncertainty by just having something that is still probabilistic but actually much more compressed, it makes everything easier. And then there are entire classes of corrective actions, super tactical corrective actions that are only possible if you do that. So that's the sort of things where frequently right now there could be corrective actions that we could suggest in theory to clients with pretty much very little efforts, considering that we have already done all the efforts to integrate the data from all their ERPs, from many data sources, but lacking the real-time status on the status of the shipments, though we cannot perform those optimization and generate the suggestion for those corrective actions. So in the future, I see more and more for Lokad the capacity to deliver optimize supply chain decisions at many levels. Some are looking far ahead, like a purchase order in Asia, but some being like very, very tactical, such as emergency replenishment needed, pass an order right now to a nearby supplier that is much more expensive for a small quantity that will help you survive the delay.
Okay, Pierre, we'll leave the last word to you as our guest. What is the key lesson you want to take for people to take away for real-time visibility within supply chains?
Yeah, I want to say that I think real-time visibility is one of the hottest topics in the supply chain these days. It's not me who tells that. It's Gartner. It's ranked as a top one topic. And I think this talk is very interesting to see how we can create value while combining with others. Our mission at Shippeo is really to focus into real-time visibility, aggregating data and giving predictive insights on that. But we see that if we share information with other systems, for sure approved by the shipper, it creates another level of value, and is this kind of ecosystems that we like to bring value to the customers and to the whole supply chain.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks both for your time this morning.
Thank you so much.
So that's everything for this week. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll be back again next week with another episode. Until then, thanks for watching.